Welcome to the Preserving Family Podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to equip you to gain insight, information, and inspiration to help you protect, teach, and guide your family during these turbulent times. Our goal is to provide tools and resources to help you strengthen and preserve your own marriages and families. Now here are your hosts, Dr. Mark and Janie Ogletree.
Hi everyone. We hope you're having an awesome, fantastic summer. And today, super excited about our topic. We're going to talk about parenthood, but we're going to talk about it through the eyes and the lens of a prophet, seer, and revelator. And in this case, that prophet is David O. Mckay. Now, a few years ago, and I always think a few years ago, and then I realized, wow, that was actually a little while back. But when I was first hired at BYU, one of the opportunities they gave us as new faculty was to go and do some research. And we would be surrounded by some good mentors that would help us do this research and then write hopefully some kind of paper or book or something that would come out of it. And so because of my interest in fatherhood and parenthood, and that's what my doctoral dissertation focused on, was parent and child relationships during the teenage years, I thought, you know what, I'm going to write about David O. Mckay. I loved President Mckay as a prophet. Not that I ever was alive, or even a member of the church when he was the president of the church, but I just knew that he had said some wonderful things about parenthood and about raising children. And I knew that he had a wonderful marriage and family life. And so I took upon myself the topic of David O. Mckay as a parent. And what that allowed me to do is it allowed me to go to the church archives and do some research on President Mckay using his journals and diaries and letters that he wrote. Some of those wonderful documents were actually housed at the University of Utah. And so I was able to spend some time there, put it all together, and then using an Erickson model of human development from my doctoral days, was able to show that with some 8 parental strengths, like care and concern and consecration, these all started with a C, by the way, and commitment, I was able to show that, President Mckay had examples in his life of every one of these great parental strengths. And then I was also able to find some of the teachings on those very principles that he had taught in General Conference and other places. And basically, all of that ended up becoming a book called No Other Success, The Fathering Practices of David O. Mckay. And it was just really cool because I was once again able to read his letters and diaries and other documents and then put this book together. And so today, we're going to talk about just a couple of those parenting principles that President Mckay taught. And I hope you'll enjoy this. I think it's some fascinating stuff because here he was teaching these things in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, and yet they apply now just as much as they did then. Let me share this with you in terms of modern research for a minute. A well-known study by the Search Institute asked thousands of children and teens what they most wanted from their parents. The top answers, you ready for this? Answer number 1, I wish my parents spent more time with me. And answer number 2, I wish my parents would listen to me more. Another major Gallup youth survey found that when children were asked what they would change about their parents, the most common answer was, I wish they would spend more time with me. And even when parents believe that they're providing enough time with their children, children often wish they had more quality time. Another study was done not too many years ago, asking children what attributes mattered the most. The attributes of their parents, those parental attributes, what mattered the most. And here's what they said: warmth and affection, availability and time together, listening and empathy, fairness and consistency, encouragement and praise, guidance and setting boundaries, modeling integrity and kindness. And so those are some great studies that we can cite from when it comes to parenting and what children actually want and need from their parents. Now, You may remember that when I talked last time in episode 1 about President Mckay as a parent, we're using Erickson's model of psychosocial development. We're going to talk about kind of a model within a model that these are parental strengths. And researchers David Dollahite and Alan Hawkins at BYU developed a model quite a few years ago that I think highlights the strengths of all parents. They said strong parents, number 1, are committed. Strong parents, number 2, have to make choices. Strong parents, number 3, are creative. Strong parents, number 4, consecration and sacrifice. Parental strength number 5 is strong parents exhibit care and concern for their children. Trait number 6, strong parents possess the attribute of change or flexibility. Attribute number 7, connection and relationships. And attribute number 8, communication. And under communication is where I place discipline. So with that, last time we talked about committed and creativity. We didn't say much about choosing, and I don't know if we will. But today we're going to focus on attributes 4 and 5, consecration and care, and how President David O. Mckay exhibited in such a strong and powerful way those attributes. So just for our audience to remember that I am quoting from a book that I wrote several years ago about President Mckay called No Other Success. And in that book, I was able to tap into the diaries and the letters that President Mckay was writing to his wife, Emma Ray, and into some of his conference talks from some of those early days, and really pull out some key information. And so as we talk about this principle of consecrate, maybe we can start by quoting President Dallin H. Oaks. He shared this experience in his talk, Good, Better, Best, that some of you may remember well. But he said, a friend took his young family on a series of summer vacation trips, including visits to memorable historic sites. At the end of the summer, he asked his teenage son which of these good summer activities he enjoyed the most. The father learned from the reply, and so did those he told of it. The thing I liked best this summer, the boy replied, was the night that you and I laid on the lawn and looked at the stars and talked. Super family activities may be good for children, but they are not always better than one-on-one time from a loving parent. And we know that strong parents find ways to spend one-on-one time. And isn't that interesting that we see parents today spending thousands and thousands of dollars on Disney cruises and traveling to Europe and doing all kinds of incredible things with their families. And here you have this child saying, actually, the thing I liked the most didn't even cost any money. It was just the night that we were laying out on the lawn and looking up at the stars and talking. Well, I love the idea that strong parents do not leave family togetherness to chance. They make things happen. They make time for their families. But there are many parents that now have bought into this phrase, it's not the quantity of time that I'm spending with my children, it's the quality. Such parents have justified their absence in the name of quality activities now, right? But I believe such an investment yields mediocre results at best. In fact, one notable family therapist, George Riekers, I think gave a great analogy for this quality and quantity time debate. He said, imagine you've gone to a very nice gourmet restaurant and you treat yourself to a steak. And although the steak costs, I'm going to change the price here because this was written a while back, but let's say that steak costs $75. The steak arrives on an expensive china plate served with flair by an impeccably dressed waiter. But you note with shock and dismay that the steak is a 1-inch cube. In horror, you question the waiter who assures you that the quality is what counts and this steak is the best. But if you're hungry, you'll also know that quantity counts too. So maybe we can put to bed that argument that's gone on for years now with parents that, well, I don't have a lot of quantity time, but the time I spend is quality time. Guess what, everyone? If you're not building on a base of quantity time, then quality time doesn't matter. Quality time is the icing on the cake for quantity time. Years ago, President Howard W. Hunter taught this, that effective family leadership requires both quantity and quality time. The teaching and governance of the family must not be left to a wife alone, to society or to the school or even to the church. His plea in a priesthood session was for fathers to engage more in spending quantity and quality time with their children. One of Satan's greatest tools today among faithful, active members of the church, and we know this, is distraction. If the father of lies and deceit can pull us just several degrees off course, he could gradually wreak havoc on our lives. And in describing this busy and chaotic world that we live in now, Sherry Dew once explained it this way. I love this quote from her. She said that Lucifer works hard to undermine our innate tendency to nurture and care for others. He wants us to become separated from each other. Voice messaging and pagers are efficient. And we can now add today cell phones, social media, Twitter, texting. But they don't replace, she said, a listening ear and a caring heart. If the adversary can keep us so busy running from one commitment to another that we no longer have time for each other, he has made great strides towards neutralizing the strength and influence that we have. We need each other. We need each other's testimonies and strength, each other's confidence and support, understanding and compassion. Lucifer would have us so busy with the details swirling around family, friends, careers, and every soccer league in town that there's not time to actually live the gospel, no time to fast and pray, to immerse ourselves in the scriptures, to worship in the temple. All the things we need to do to study for our moral test. In other words, he wants us to become a little more concerned with the world than with the gospel, and a little more interested in life today than in life forever. I think that's a great quote from Sister Sherry Dew. So if we're not careful, busyness can destroy our family relationships and erode our souls. President Mckay, I think, provided a tremendous example of how parents can balance their lives and consecrate their efforts towards their children. Remember, we talked about this last time, but despite his busy schedule, President Mckay was a father who found ways to always make time for his children. He understood that to be an effective father, he would often have to sacrifice his own time and his own interest. In fact, in General Conference on one occasion, President Mckay taught this, that children take time, trouble, and more patience than we usually have. They interfere with freedom, good times, and luxury. But children are the real purpose behind marriage. That's his end of quote. And although parenthood does require time, trouble, and patience, President Mckay also recognized on another occasion that children are our most important possessions, he said. And he always tried his best to spend as much time with his own children as he could. And it wasn't easy to do. Remember, as I mentioned last time, that President Mckay was called to be an apostle in his early 30s. Not only did he have children at home, he had young children at home. And now he's being called away to state conferences and other things. What was he going to do? How was he going to manage all this? This is what we're going to talk about here for a minute. One of the things President Mckay decided to do, as often as he could do, was to take his children with him on state conference assignments. This was a practice he engaged in as often as the occasion permitted. In fact, here's an example. It was March the 22nd, 1907. And David was on his way to a state conference in Cache Valley. He wrote this in his diary. Took Lawrence, my little boy, with me. This was his first initial trip. I hope to take him as often as I can. After the conference was over, David reported in his journal that we had an excellent conference. Lawrence has been a little hero, he said. Now, it appears that David and Lawrence traveled to Logan by carriage because he reported that Lawrence survived the wintry ride all right. If you can imagine riding in a carriage in the wintertime, it was March the 22nd, so still maybe the early spring. But from Ogden to Logan and back in a carriage, I just can't even imagine those days. Now, Lawrence must have behaved really well because David became quite daring, and about 2 months later, he takes him again. This time they're going to go up to Logan to speak at the graduation. And in those days, Utah State University was called Brigham Young College. This was May the 26th, 1907. Boarded the train at 12:10 p.m. from, once again, Ogden to Logan, and here's his journal entry. Took Lawrence and Llewellyn, so both of his sons, with me. They were intensely interested as well as interesting, and even though David points out his boys were interesting, I put that in quotes, they must have been quite well behaved because he continued to take those boys with him. And that was one of his trademarks, is taking his children with him on those trips. This gave him, especially if they were in a train, plenty of time to connect with his children. He would use these outings to teach his children as much as he could about the church, the gospel, about the world in general. He enjoyed taking his children to historical sites and places of interest. In fact, in August of 1910, just before the start of the school year, David took Lawrence with him to a state conference in Taber, Alberta, Canada. And on that trip, Lawrence wrote home to his mother and reported that he was having a great time with his father, both fishing and camping. On their way to Canada, the train made a stop in Butte, Montana. This gave David and his oldest son the opportunity to attend a circus. And so you can see that he's planning these state conference meetings, these state conference sessions out, and he's finding out where and when he can take his children. Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, circuses, all kinds of fun that he took his children on as he went on those conferences. Now, for modern day parents, what does this mean? Are there business trips and other occasions like that where we can take our children? I know that I've done that on occasion, and it's been wonderful. One of the things I admired about my father-in-law is that whenever he had an errand to run, he always took one of his children with him, and that gave him one-on-one time with his kids. And he would do that with me on occasion, too. He'd say, hey, what are you up to? Nothing. Get in the car. Let's go. And he always would say, I'll buy you a drink. And there was always, some drink at a convenience store. But I think President Mckay had that same ability and gift. He just didn't go places that often where he couldn't take his children with him. And sometimes it wasn't just state conference visits, but even when he was home, he would take his children with him, especially when he had to go check on the farm. Boy, he just never did drive up to that Dry Hollow farm in Ogden Canyon without taking children with him. Here's a journal excerpt. Drove to Huntsville, cut hay, took Llewellyn with me, and we stayed overnight. Always taking his children, most often one at a time, to Huntsville. He enjoyed taking his children also to circuses, as I mentioned before, on joyrides in the car, and even on vacation. Historian Francis Gibbons wrote this of President Mckay. Often a man confronted with such multiple demands on his time will sacrifice family needs to other responsibilities, but David O. Mckay never did so. He endeavored to interweave his church, professional, and business activities with those of his family. This he did by taking family members with him when he performed other duties, as we have already seen, and as we shall see him do in his later career to even a greater degree. And the time he did spend with his family was always quality time, with recreational activities being planned, so as to involve the entire family if possible. President Mckay didn't have much free time. And even if he did have free time, it was usually spent driving from Ogden to the family farm up in Huntsville. And, usually there was work. This just was not a man who just sat around watching TV or spending idle time. In fact, here's his quote. This religion teaches men to work. The idler has no place in the church. It's a pretty strong statement from President Mckay. But there's a lot of accounts in his journals of taking his children with him up to the farm and teaching them. After his older sons were gone from home, President Mckay would take his younger children, Ned and Bobby, to the farm where they would work long days as well. In fact, in one of President Mckay's journal accounts, he's happy that they planted 3/4 of an acre of potatoes. Like other men who became prophets, President Mckay seemed to relax with his children by working with them. And aside from reading to them and working with them, when he could, he enjoyed playing a good game of baseball with them as well. I don't have any evidence from the research I've done that President Mckay golfed or fished or pursued many hobbies. I think his family was his hobby and his first priority. Here's what he taught once. When one puts business or pleasure above his home, that moment starts on the downgrade to soul ruin. The loss of fortune is nothing compared with the loss of home. This was a man who never put anything before his wife or children. And once again, one of the ways that he connected with them was work. President Mckay taught that successful parents would find ways to spend time with their children, that they would make necessary sacrifices so that they can be involved in their children's lives. Contemporary parents would do well to adjust their schedules and determine how they can be more involved in the lives of their children. Now, just specifically to fathers for a minute, years ago, there was a man named Michael Gurian who wrote a book that I still recommend. It's called The Wonder of Boys. He said this: if the father, tired from work, spends just 10 minutes with a boy or half an hour, both will feel refueled. If, whether in the boy's infancy or later in life, the father doesn't spend the minimal amount of time with his child, he'll actually end up spending more than that amount of energy dealing with his son's anger, rejection, and abandonment throughout evening, weekend, or even a lifetime. To be a parent means to make sacrifices. We understand that. And there are things that good parents will give up in the name of their children. Such sacrifices are as simple sometimes as attending a child's activity, game, performance, or just taking a trip together, or explaining to a child the way something works when they ask some of those questions, or how we can fix something that just got broke. Some men will even turn down job opportunities, and women, or give up their personal interest or hobbies so that their families can flourish. Years ago, the First Presidency made this statement to fathers: as a leader in your home, you plan and sacrifice to achieve the blessing of a unified and happy family. To do all this requires that you live a family-centered life. You know, I was very impressed with my wife's family, and I was always asking her parents questions because I wanted to be a good dad and I wanted us to have a good family like their family. I remember once asking my mother-in-law, how did you guys do it? How did you have such an incredible family? Without missing a beat, without even thinking, she just said it was a total and complete sacrifice. And she didn't have to say much, but I knew what that meant, that they pretty much gave up a lot of their own interest and pursuits so that they could put their children first. And they did a great job of that, by the way. The next parental strength that we'll talk about today, and once again, we'll use President Mckay as a model of how he demonstrated this trait, was care and concern. I may call it nurturing in our conversation today, but care and concern. I'm going to quote Elder Robert D. Hales for a minute. He said, in many ways, earthly parents represent Heavenly Father in the process of nurturing, loving, caring for, and teaching their children. Children naturally look to their parents to learn of the characteristics of a Heavenly Father. After they come to love, respect, and have confidence in their earthly parents, they often unknowingly develop the same feelings towards their Heavenly Father. I love that it was Brigham Young who taught parents that we should treat our children as an angel would treat them. And as we strive to be Christ-like, we hopefully will desire to treat our children in a manner that Christ would treat them. Nurturing parents shouldn't just demonstrate care and concern for their children, but they should attempt to recognize the needs of their children and then attempt to meet those needs. Strong parents would try to provide for their children what they need at the time they need it the most. And nurturing parents continually strive to be actively involved in their children's lives. These parents, nurturing parents, caring parents, are involved with their children. And they're not afraid to show affection to their children. Now, David O. Mckay was this type of parent. He demonstrated care and concern as he waited upon his children and showed them affection. For a busy man, it's really remarkable to see how tuned in and connected he was to his children. Now, he taught this, President Mckay did. He said that parents cannot with impunity shirk the responsibility to protect childhood and youth. Even though David was gone much of the time, his family was on his mind constantly. In fact, from his journals and from his diaries, we read things like this. This was July the 31st, 1907, Wednesday, in case you're interested, from Denver. I am worried as I write this because I feel all is not well at home. I sent a telegram to Ray inquiring about the children. And so as we get into this idea of connection and nurturing, from a Latter-day Saint perspective, we can also talk about the Spirit and how the Holy Ghost can help us be in tune to the needs of our children. And David O. Mckay always seemed to know when his children were sick, no matter how far away from home he was. Much of the care and concern and the need to protect his family came forth in those letters that he wrote to his family while he was away on church business. After his call to the Quorum of the 12, he wrote his wife, Mckay, from Cedar City, Utah. Here's what he said: "Had a pleasant rest last night and feel well this morning. I dreamed, however, that Lawrence nearly got run over by a car. The little hero kept his head and schemed to escape. It seems so real. I feel a little worried. Don't stay alone nights. Get Annie and Tom to occupy the little room. I wish I could give you a birthday kiss, but I must keep it and give it with interest when we meet. Kiss baby and Lawrence for me. Accept my truest love and believe me." That was a letter, one of many, where President Mckay was concerned about the health of his children. One of the challenges that he and Mckay had to contend with was dealing with their children when they were sick. And like many other parents in the early 1900s, the Mckay children were stricken with coughs, colds, pneumonia, measles, the flu, and many other illnesses. It was difficult for Mckay to shoulder the load of tending to her sick children while balancing her many other responsibilities. But at the same time, it broke David's heart to leave his worn-out wife and sick children behind as he traveled the church as an apostle. I think some of the most acute anxiety he faced was worrying for Mckay and the children when they were sick. On August the 2nd, 1907, Friday, he was relieved because he had just returned from a state conference assignment and the children were sick. He wrote in his diary that when he arrived home, the baby was very sick. She had been for 2 weeks. Lawrence was better. Llewellyn was still ailing. Spent a happy day with Ray and our babies. There are many accounts like that of David reporting on the illnesses of his family, but also rejoicing when he was able to return home from church business to help his wife take care of those kids. Now, there's one touching story to share today that I hope you'll appreciate. They had a young son that many may not know about named Royal. What a great name, Royle. He became very sick. He was a baby and seemed to have pain in his knee, accompanied with fever and lethargy. Royal was diagnosed with rheumatism. Meanwhile, it was now the April General Conference, and David had church responsibilities to tend to. He wrote this in his diary: "Learning by telephone that baby is worse. I returned home at 11:45 p.m. Poor little Royal. He is suffering from an infected knee, probably caused by a fall. The doctors do not know what is the matter. The Dr. Morrill thinks the infection has been in his system since his recent illness. Baby seems better, but his fever is still around 104. Now, by the way, if we have a baby today with 104-degree temperature, we're running to the emergency room." David must have gone back to the conference the next morning because he wrote in his diary that he was present at the Salt Lake Tabernacle at 10 a.m. Immediately after the morning session of the conference, he recorded, "At noon, I learned by telegram that Royal will probably have to taken to the hospital. I feel I ought to miss this afternoon meeting and go home to my wife and baby boy. But I did conclude to remain here at the meetings until 4 p.m. Up all night with our sick baby boy. He has a fever of 106. And a lot of you will know that that's just the danger zone right there. The following day, April the 7th, 1912, David wrote at 3:30 a.m. that Royal had 2 seizures within a 2-hour time period. He further recorded, and we're quoting, "The doctors have concluded that his only hope is having an operation, and this is extremely hazardous because of the weakness of his heart. The operation was performed under the direction of 3 doctors, Dr. Morrill supervising. Everything was successful. The diagnosis has been just right. At 10:35 a.m., it was all over, and we felt encouraged. He soon recovered from the effects of the anesthetic and was less feverish and entirely conscious all day. But toward the night, his breathing became short and his fever began to rise. He was evidently in great pain from some other cause besides his little afflicted leg. Oh, what a night of suffering for our darling boy. Every breath he drew seemed agony to him. The doctors examined him this morning and discovered that his pain was due to pleurisy on both sides. At this, we almost lost hope, but later when Dr. Morrill told us that by an examination, he knew what germ had caused the infection and that he had the antitoxin. So again, we took courage, but Royal was too weak and complications of disease too many. He battled bravely all day, taking the little stimulant given him at intervals as willingly as a grown person would. About 9:30 p.m., Papa, Thomas E., and I administered to him again. Ray felt very hopeful and lay down beside him for a little rest. Soon his pulse weakened, and we knew our baby would soon leave us. Mama was the last word on his lips. Just before the end came, he stretched out his little hands, and as I stooped to caress him, he encircled my neck and gave me the last of many of the most loving caresses ever a father received from a darling child. It seemed he realized he was going and wanted to say goodbye, Papa. But his little voice was already stilled by weakness and pain. Death had taken our baby boy. The end came at 1:50 a.m. without even a twitch of a muscle. He is not dead but sleepeth, and never was more applicable to any soul, for he truly went to sleep. Now, to read that account, and I'm done quoting, is heart-wrenching. The following days in the Mckay home were somber after the passing of Royal. It took the family a short while to really recover from that. In the years that followed, Royal was often on the mind of David and Emma Ray. Each Memorial Day that followed his death, the family stopped by the Ogden Cemetery to pay tribute to Royal. This is just one of those heart-wrenching stories that you hope never, that no parent has to go through. We know that people do, and what a challenge that must be. You know, another interesting thing about President Mckay was, and we don't talk about this enough, but the world tour that he took with Hugh J. Cannon in 1920 and 21, literally traveling the entire earth around the world. And in those letters and diary entries, journal entries, there were just so many times that President Mckay expressed how much he meant his family. Listen to this one. I'm really homesick this morning. This monotonous life in the month of June is beginning to tell on my nerves. Last night and this morning I've thought almost continually about my people at home. I can even now see the kiddies playing on the lawn, Mama and Lou Jean on the summer porch, and Llewellyn on his way to the Dry Hollow farm. June 11th, I imagined him coming home with feet soaked and trousers wet to the hips, but happy because he caught 4 fish. If I were home, I should be in a better place, but travelers must be content. There are just many, many journal accounts like that of President Mckay telling his family how much he missed them and how difficult it was to be away from them, dreams he would have about them, his concerns. Through those letters, President Mckay had to be creative. Often he was teaching his children, not just the gospel, but about everything, history, government, science, whatever, because he was gone so often. And that was one of the things he had to do. And one of the most impressive parts of President Mckay's life was not just that he helped his own children, that he was concerned about them, but he was concerned for the well-being of other people's children too. And I've often heard it said that one of the great indicators that we're progressing spiritually and coming unto Christ is the way that we treat others. And I've often stretched that a little bit and thought it's also the way we treat other people's children. How do we treat other people's children? That's the example of, or the epitome of a Christ-like human who treats other people's children with as much care and concern as their own. President Mckay's son Edward shared the following experience. He related that President Mckay's car had been stolen. That's a big deal. The police apprehended the thief, and it turned out to be a young boy about 12 or 13. President Mckay was asked if he wanted to prosecute the boy. He replied, "No, I'll take care of it." President Mckay then interviewed the boy and asked him why he had stolen his car. The boy answered that he just wanted to drive a car. That's a great reason why, right? He just wanted to drive the car. President Mckay told him to come over to his house and would let him drive his car. He did that once a week for a long time. The young boy later became a police officer so that he could help others, just as President Mckay had helped him. I think that's such a great, great statement. Well, I'm grateful for President Mckay as a nurturing, kind, loving father. We know that people don't care how much we know until they know how much we care, and President Mckay cared. He demonstrated that while he was away from his children, but also while he was with them at home, showing them affection, spending time with them, taking them to events, helping them to have fun experiences, to have memorable experiences. So everyone, I'm grateful for this prophet who has taught us so much about parenthood, not just in what he taught verbally or directly at a general conference, or even by what he wrote, but just by what he did, his actions. His actions clearly indicate the kind of father that he was.